thanks for joining us. It's an honor and pleasure to have Holaday Mason and Maryann McFadden with us today. Holaday Mason is the author of 2 chapbooks and 5 full-length collections, Towards the Forest and Dissolve, New Rivers Press, The Red Bowl, A Fable and Poems, Red Hand Press, and the She series, A Venice Correspondence with Sarah McClay, What Books Press, and The Weaver's Body, T-Bot Bach, nominated for 3 pushcarts, widely published. She is also a portrait and fine art photographer, focusing on the beauty of aging and humans as a part of nature. A psychotherapist in private practice since 1986, Holaday also runs therapeutic writing workshops that involve guided healing journeys into our inner worlds. Holaday Mason has a certain confidence of style that is reinforced by her excellent use of language, precise observations, and acute awareness of the other, a musicality. It contains common things. It's complicated at times, experimental. She's superb in the making of the longer poem. She writes in Cantilever, quote, "You linger in what it is to be lost, and listening to that freedom, sense the weight of even the growing grass," end of quote. She shows us the beauty in the commonplace in a sensuous and fertile way, makes an ascent out of the descent. Here's a brilliant poet, Holaday Mason.
Hi, thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jennifer. Good to see you, Mary. And thank everybody for tuning in on this cusp of something. We're waiting to see what happens, right? So I'm going to start with some older poems that seemed kind of congruent for me. And I can see Harry and Mary. And so, Harry, I'm reading to you.
I'm listening.
Yeah. Concerning various birds. The photo was taken after my mother began to grow deaf. She's ahead of me on the trail through the dinosaur ferns at Orcas Lake. We had just quarreled over what I don't know, the subject forgotten, but not that fact. We must have hurt each other badly enough to want to part. Watching her between the slim white elbows of sun-blanched pine, hands clasped behind her back, chin tilted straight as the prow of a little ship plowing through waves of gravity, in her robes of silence, tiny body disappearing into the framework of the old forest she left me. And this was as credible to me as any kind of love. The ochre farms of Winter, Wisconsin still have my mother's heart. Even from the distance of a lifetime, watching her, I wondered if she ever recalled the creak of her father's footfall at night, the curdle of red wine. As I imagined it, there were accidents of sorts, then bathwater running. No one talked about it in the morning, but what never gets said can still be heard. Perhaps she needed her dreams of snow. Snow is quiet. I remember the birds were loud that day, crows, red-sided towhees, blue jays, but she couldn't hear them, or my camera snapping right after I'd run hard to catch her. She was mad. She was walking fast and thinking herself in a private world. She was farting like a train of quacking ducklings. I caught her arm and turned her to face me and shouted out one word, ducks. Recognition is like a satellite circling 2 worlds, she and I, and when our mouths opened wide, we laughed all the birds right out of the sky. Square dance. Square dance. But mother, it was the wind. It hurried my skin. It dragged me under the liquid elms, the leaves green and falling, that Santa Ana hot in my loose cotton underwear. Beside your everyday school teacher clothes, the dance dresses smelled of perfume. Their rickrack silver glitters on three-tiered skirts that flower off your thighs, your calves whenever you go. Trains of cloth drag out behind me onto the poison lawn where the neighborhood boys throw me down on the ground and I stand back up for more. Wearing your huge blue high-heeled shoes, my steps pierce the long tongues of fabric. First I tumble on turquoise, then rip the white with rose. Only when those two are punctured do I swirl in your lavender blue. Mother, I'll mend the slits, the holes I've torn in your shimmering things. Rest your dry eyes, worried plum mouth. Watch me spin in circles to get you a husband, us a father, to quiet this wind. Speaking of long poems, I think I'll read now a long poem called Pulchritude, and it's for my friend Celeste Goyer, the poet, artist, and beloved of Jim Cushing, the poet and brother. So this is Pulchritude for Celeste. And thank you to Marcia De La O and Phil Taggart for publishing it in Spillway. I think it was last year. Yeah, thank you. Pulchritude. Beautiful. She uses the word pulchritude, and I can't recall what it means. Me, a poet, near 59. And I have to ask and do as the man next door drags the garbage cans to the curb of the as the small town rises to Sunday, the fallen blooms of the late magnolias lining the streets, filling now with September students bound for winter, yet clinging hard to summer. I watch them while she explains the word, the nature of arcane treasures, of cleavage, sparked allure, gold tan skin, or white, ebony, or brown, young women in tube tops and cutoffs, halters, bikinis, hip huggers sashaying PINK across the ass, flashing the final inch of butts and thighs, the rules of young muscles rippling fierce with aromas of dark musk, of diving in and drowning in the hidden temple, a tattoo rose at the gateway like a sentinel, pulchritude, comeliness, pulp and pulse, plunge of round, flood full, straining cloth tight over the unbreakable, pliant, yielding, smooth, supple, forbidden fortune cookies of sheen, lip gloss polish, lid glitter, moist skin on all sweaty curves, plump hallways of animal cohesion, those succulent well springs molding the shapes of this world to gauze, to silk, to elastic scarlet wobble of Spanx, mesh, mash, satin, rich from form, itching the hands of humans craving to stroke and hold, grasp, flow with the choirs of bottoms, of breasts, tummies, that is inescapable weather of nude shoulders, lustrous secrets, rippled, kneaded, molded, those bowls of bones, pummeled into dreamscapes of a lasting flesh heaven, the clay of our bodies, the stuffed sheaths, dizzying enchantments of the long brown, black, red, blonde hairs, the shaven, creamy sheerness, the tawny silk, loved. All globes of sugar, loved. Tree sap, or tables of flesh, of femme, of cock, unspoken guttural operatic howls, loved. Annunciation, loved. Corridors of desire, baskets of babies, and union, oh, pulchritude. The Last Supper, the reason for little black dresses and lacy undies, for prayers, for food, sirens, siren, spirals of rapture, young bodies all over the place, perfumed and everywhere promenading the main drag of Sunday before they too fly away like seed pods tumbling into the relentless season. Where are we? Let's see, Harry. I've got a... Okay, I'm going to move on to the poem Cantilever. It's very strange reading to myself. The lipstick is good. I'm glad about that. So, Cantilever. In the morning, it's 2 hours getting beyond pain, as certain as damp weather. Finally, walking your oblivious dog around the corner, you follow a caravan of clouds traveling slowly across the gold towers of Century City. A man throws a beer can from his car. A yellow finch lands on a stoplight. It returns to green. You linger in what it is to be lost, and listening to that freedom, sense the weight of even the grass growing. The city is hard and stupid with hardness. The young backfiring up the streets after midnight. It interests you, the facelessness, how we all become similarly mystical when dying. This storm will be warm and swollen with jasmine. The rain will swell lace through the purple trees. You already put your winter wools away, remember? A distant friend's child has died before her, and she's an old woman. The sign over an ancient door translates into something about a tailor, about a cook. The unlit street lamps whisper. You would have held her close if she'd have let you. Spider, for Phoebe, spider. Just waking, I watch as through mid-air a being, its body, a small, perfect pearl, spins from one plane to another, from soil, in fact, towards somewhere beyond. All I can see, a doorway of sunlight, rain gutter, roof eave, the jacaranda limb, new pods, leaves, a cloud-washed sky into which she weaves, traversing a ladder as sheer as wind through fields of air on one simple thread, too light, too bare, yet tough enough to carry her well from one world to another. I think I'm going to read now a couple of new poems and then a couple of short poems to end. I think that's about the right amount of time, Harry, yes?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. So these are new and not read out before. And the first one is called The Sign Says We All Slumber Soon. Such an unexpected night. No verbiage, but something much softer. The umbrella of a dark crane, its whole wingspan covering any small rips in the sky, as a sleepless man rises, writes letters to release himself from the antique house of memories, a strange calm gathering at the center where they disappear. When he returns to the room where we rest, the odd spaces fill with doorways of black or evergreen, some flickering golden, as if the end of a lit wick floods and wax. There, in the quiet cedar, our bodies sleep. The water of him, of me, learning again to dream. Woman leaning over a resting man, reciting, and this is has a nod to the poet Bridget Begin Kelly for her poem Black Swan. Woman leaning over a resting man, reciting. We look alike, don't you agree? No, you say, but still you do, around the eyes. Golden lions roaming into fire, licking, and a third secreted on your forehead, granting permission to refrain from repeating the circles, the past, your irises, or guilt, eggs, shells uncracked, and of course I was no virgin when we met, but was still completely whole. And admit it, it's like looking in a mirror. You must agree. But no, you insist you get to play the animal, the hairy bear, insist that I am beautiful. And I say no, we are both beast and beauty, and each are true as the reseated garden, peeking through those crooked cedar gates, nearly disappeared in ivy as dense as a forgotten fairy tale forest. Two beings prying open the lair of stone and wet moss, the womb where two swans become one, a pale tender neck curled around a darker velvet one in infinity's braid, twinned in the thick, fertile nest. Call it the orchard where we can come to rest, warming a god in our home. Call it that mad dance. Call it the ringing in the ears, always present, those bells of recognition. I would like to read two poems to finish now. And one was written in 1993, it looks like. And this is just a shout out to Jackson Wheeler, a fantastic poet who was with us. And he published a journal, which now my memory just fell out. But I could not get a poem into that journal. And finally, he liked this poem, and it is called Beauty. And it was no. And finally, he took this little poem, Beauty. Oh, it was called Solo. The journal was Solo. I'm sure many people that are poets here remember. It was a beautiful, beautiful work out of Ventura. Beauty. The old hound dog stands bow-legged in the meadow, befuddled by butterflies who are tying the spring air in knots. They have bewitched him, as only love or beauty can. And when the two white cranes land near the forest pond, it will be too much. He may try to bite the sunlight from the sky, the colors from the flowers, the bees from their stripes. He may run in circles and try to hide his nose. He may need some help. We will need some too. And then lastly, another poem that's a little quieter and concerns an animal friend, Lullaby. There is the stand of pines at the end of the field. No fence, just the corn stubble field where a gray horse, like a brother, is breathing slow, tufted clouds of hot breath into the night blue hills of snow. Call him Clayton, for the swayback one who once carried you home, fed you his warmth so many times. He now lives inside of you. As the wind comes and the wider world is forgotten, he is at peace. Perhaps he is peace, that shush, shush of time, the humble, patient stamp of hoof, the tiny shaking off of the darkness, the plain moon that has accumulated like a heaven.
Thank you, Holaday. That certainly was heaven. Thank you for your personal and intimate, imaginative, original poetry. There's a wonderful beauty in your work, and I could listen to you forever. Let me just ask you, we have a couple of minutes before Marijane reads. When did you write your first poetry, your first poem, number one? And number two, what is it about poetry? You've done so many wonderful things in different fields. What is it about poetry that attracts you?
Okay, I think the first poem that I wrote, I know I was about 5 years old, Harry. And I was like leaning out the window of my bedroom, and my mother had planted irises, yellow and lavender. And the line, there was a little tiny rhyming poem, and it went, my iris comes in yellow, just like a falling star. And I don't know where it goes from there. I think the reason I returned to poetry is that, it has the capacity to articulate that which is otherwise unarticulatable, but articulate it enough to awaken in our brothers and sisters things that otherwise might remain not articulated. So music, of course, does the same, but I don't think it's quite as it doesn't have quite the entry and just the beauty of the imagery and the sound of the language. Language is just like, it's like nature. It's a natural force, and it's a communication through our medium of language, of bringing that which is not form into form and touching another person, and also reminding ourselves, waking ourselves up all the time, over and over and over, about how to keep our attention on those things that are more subtle, not in the concrete or quotidian world.
I like that. That's a wonderful explanation, and in many ways it describes your poetry. So it gave me also insight into you. So thank you very much for your wonderful reading. It was it reverberates and stays with me. So thank you very much, Holaday.
Thank you, Harry, for inviting me and giving this gift to everybody. So I mean, it's just for nourishment for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for blessing us. Our next poet is Marijane McFadden. Marijane McFadden's first book, Eye of the Blackbird, won the 1995 Four-Way Books Intro Prize in Poetry. Devil Deer, McFadden's second book, was published in 2014 by Alice James Books. McFadden is a graduate of Occidental College and New York University. Her poetry has been published in local and national magazines and has been anthologized in collections by Scribner and Ballantine Books. In 2010, she was awarded a MacDowell Fellowship. MacDowell taught English and poetry at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. Marijane McFadden's love poems and elegies are clear-eyed and elegant, down-to-earth and poignant. She has a large range of emotion. Her poems have great depth and breadth. She's an excellent craftswoman. Her poetry can best be described by these words from her lovely Night Windows, quote, "By the love that renders them and strips them bare," end of quote. Here's a superlative poet, Marijane McFadden.
Thank you, Harry. That was a very generous introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Holaday. I hadn't heard you read before, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. So I was going to start with something else, but since Harry just mentioned that last poem, let me see if I can find it quickly here. I'll read the whole thing. It's called Night Windows. The neighbors are making love again. Their side, resonant cries drawn out unexpectedly, honestly, into a summer night that was longing for them, waiting to be filled. My cats stir and shift on their pillows. And if, at an exhibition, I am struck dumb standing in front of Hopper's night windows, it is not by the half-dressed woman or the breeze that flies out of the painting and lifts my hair, but by the love that renders them and strips them bare. My own loves and failures, of which even now it is difficult to speak, have been forgiven here. I can go on. I am not unlike the happy man next door. I can hear him whistling in the shower. This next poem, I lived in Mexico for about 14 years, and this was written there. I had a yard that backed up onto a mountain, and it was quite wild in the mountain, and we had a lot of lizards in the yard. And I had a cat that kept killing the lizards and bringing them into the house and sort of eating them alive. And it was kind of terrible, but it's kind of what cats do too. So, but anyway, I felt bad for the lizards, and thinking of the Buddhist concept of the God in all things, I wrote this, and it's titled "To the Lizard God." God of damnation, lizard God, eaten alive each day by the cat, and your guts ground into the carpet, or flung, O God of abandonment, into a corner, God of stench, God of retribution, warm and soft in my paper napkin, tossed in the wastebasket, carried out with crumbs and paint flakes, fruit skins and onion husks, nail parings and hair fished from drains, with crushed bugs and blooded, swatted, stinging things. O God that gives and takes away, forget me in your pain. Turn your face from me in your suffering. Close your eyes upon me in the furnace of midday, as you begin to rot or in the tepid rain. When ants deliver your flesh to their queen, when your acids leak into dirt, when your frail bones fall into calcium and enter the clear blood of plants, when you are sit at last to the top of the tree, think of me, O infant. When the brown moth alights on you and you give thanks, O God of the one of everlasting touch, O breath, remember me. This is another one from those years in Mazatlan, and it's in 3 parts. It's called Disco Saturday Night. One night in August, after a full 2 months of tropical heat, almost unnoticed in the glamour and glare, after a lifetime of swimming more or less alone, she glides into the beach and strikes sand and drags herself straight out of the water 30 yards and starts to dig. A crowd gathers. Women with their shoes held in their hands, men in white shirts and leather. Someone has called the harbor police. Stand back, give her air, give her room. By now she has made a shallow basin and has turned and started to lay. She has barely arrived in time. Wet and ripe, the white orbs pile over one another, each one deliberate, each one important, as the crowd murmurs and the cars slow down, and her eyes, glazed, seem not to see, not to understand. Her urge so strong, so compelling. She defecates and begins pushing sand over the nest with her paddles, pushing, and then begins her trip back to the waves, half lifted and hurried along by the harbor police who will dig up her eggs to incubate them. When she hits the first wave, she lifts a little, then keeps crawling and hits the second wave, suddenly light and free. And with a few strong thrusts, escapes the light, the noise, the task, the scent of dogs and rats, and disappears headlong into the sea. It was not the thing itself. It should not have been remarkable. 100 years in the past, nobody would have noticed or stopped to watch one female among thousands, one nest with its ping-pong balls faintly luminous. We would have been digging, shoveling the piles of unborn islands, continents into a bag to be eaten without guilt, seasoned with lime juice and salt, lips smacked and singing. It was inexhaustible. It was a universe. It was like a woman giving herself for the first time, every time. Like sex that comes and goes and comes again. It was a divine food. How could anyone have turned away from what was offered and what was so clearly good? The turtle swims alone out of the wide bay. Overhead the swells, greens and yellows filtered by clouds of kelp, shadows of gray whales, whole herds moving with one mind to the warm waters where they will give birth. Females spurting single child whales, shimmying free in shoals of blood, turning and nuzzling them up to the air. Hosed clouds of milk in the water, nurturing the small ones as they bump and swim together, lumbering into the shallows, resting there. The turtle swims on, feeds and dives with her broad paddles pulling her. She does not think about her daughters and sons curled in their paper shells. the life throbbing in the jellied forms, the idea of turtle constant in them, the need to be cooled by the tide and warmed by the sun. She does not ask for anything, but leaves them there, impassive, trusting. Hours ago, she had already forgotten. I seem to be writing about whales a lot. So this is another one. The whales. Can't read my own writing here. This is a much older poem, and you'll see that it's more formal in tone. And I should explain the first line a bit. I was living in Seattle, and I looked out. My house looked out on the house next door. And the house had been recently painted, and the people who painted it hadn't let the wood in the clapboards dry properly. So they painted it, with that kind of a plastic paint, and when the sun came out, the water created bubbles in the paint. And as I watched the bubbles and the lines of the clapboard, and being a poet with a weird imagination, it became something else. And it's called That Year the Whales. That year the whales rose out of the green paint. I forgot to hate the things I used to hate. I left the wallpaper hanging in strips and let the cats go in and out while books piled up in drifts. That year I let myself stay up late and drink, though the clock that rang at 6 was loudly cursed. That was the year the children's rooms began to reek of moldering oranges and chocolate. And I had yet to write 1,000 stupid lines about love, that impossible give and take. Though I and a friend took time enough to understand the words we couldn't say. All that spring, the shadows made a changing shape on the neighbors' clapboard walls, like rows of ocean waves, where blisters from the summer sun began to swell with a cetacean grace and let their bellies roll. I watched out my window while the slow months wait. That year the whales rose out of the green paint, pressed like coal in my throat, until the whole year lit up and dove and shrank itself to a minute. That poem took me 20 years to write. I just couldn't get it, but finally. So the next one is called Like Candles. How are we doing for time?
12 minutes.
Okay. All right. Like candles. Thinking on this rainy day of old lovers, like candles blown out on a cake. I hate how life shrinks the huge fish I caught and photographed, which 10 years later looks like a small perch. And the house I lived in once with its vaulted rooms, which turns out to be quite ordinary. Even the ranch, which was my universe, caught by a backward glance from the new highway at 70 miles per hour as I speed toward my death, is just a dimple in the hills, tilted and spinning away into space. And the breasts, the areolas I woke to touch, the fragrances, the silks and secrets, the bell voice breaking over me like morning light, the fried egg happy on its plate, surfaces for a moment, and slips away. I don't know why, now my life is steady as a train on its track. I regret what I lost. Like a coin tossed into a river of cash, a dime I held and warmed in my fist, I traded that for this. So, more recently, I've been writing about what I think we're all concerned about is the changes in our world. And I titled this Anthropocene, which, as you probably know, refers to what geologists are calling this era where human activity has changed the actual geology of the earth. Anthropocene. Where will we run without houses? What will we shout? The broken, the disarranged, those thwarted and blocked, the terrorized, those in childbirth, those in a ditch, who changed their minds with closed fists, who were tampered with, the speechless, the smeared, those buried half alive, those who live without animals, who chop down trees, the cursed, the artless. What will become of the mourners, those with emerald rings, are sitting sad in cafes, the one who wished to be dolphins? All that time preparing ourselves. And when we are sucked into the dust bin with everyone we love and everyone we hate and all their kin, with elephants shot for their tusks, sows with their piglets, the jubilant, the generous, oh, sly order and force, what of all the candles we lit? Moon tongue, fountain, brothel of cowbird and fox, ink and papyrus, thou, arbiter of wolves, cranes, crows, and yarrow, may the mountains yet harbor the marmoset. May the condor loop once more over the bus. One of my favorite things, if you can call it a thing, on Earth are the bristlecone pines up in the White Mountains outside of Bishop. And so this is called bristlecone pine. And the bristlecone pines are the oldest living non-cloning trees on Earth. And one in particular is named Methuselah, and she's the oldest. She's 5,000 years old. And I was just trying to comprehend that. And her name's Methuselah, but I know she's a woman. I know she's female. So anyway, bristlecone pine. Her sprout broke the glacial ice, held where few beasts could reach her. 5,000 years passed. Soft skies whiffed, seasons snapped, pyramids, civilizations hopped and skipped, vast armies sparked. And yet, the life in her pressed. And still, the thick sap urges upward in a single living strip of bark. She stands, anchored and adamant. The eons in her wood arrest. Her years ring thinner than the thinnest paper. She stood at the making of our clay tablets and stands now at the end of books. Okay. Well, I hope it isn't really the end of books, but. Okay. I guess I have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to read Goodbye. Well, maybe it's a little too soon to read Goodbye, but anyway. Let's see. Page 33. This is a favorite of mine, partly because it was an assignment many years ago when I had studied with Carolyn Kaiser, who became my mentor, and then after that, I occasionally went to a conference where she was speaking or something like that, and she had a little group, and she assigned us. She said, write a poem. The title has to be Giving Up Writing, and the first word has to be goodbye. And this just kind of came out. And so I changed the title to Goodbye. Goodbye, dear monster. I wish you well. I hope you won't be judged by your scars. With your eyes of all sizes and colors, you could be a lighthouse or a prophet. And though you have too many thumbs and arms that are short for your great bulk, you can love. Am I not your mother? And haven't I scoured the planet all my life for such a heart? I'll never forget how I found it in the rail yard, chuffing in its impatience to labor. It was easy to find the redwoods, difficult to drag them home and join them to your torso. Over the years, how many children have I set lumbering toward the village? And of those who returned, how many odd parts are left, nodding, tapping toward some impossible future? You are the last and the best. You may be wondering why I gave you breasts. They are my own. Trust me.
Thank you very much, Marijane.
So, how are we for time?
Do you have any more to read, or you want to stop there?
What have we got?
You have 3.5 minutes.
I have 3.5 minutes. Let me read one more.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Forgive me for that.
No, it's fine. This is fairly recent, and it's called Imagine. Horses gallop wild in the dry brush. Dust rises around them, hackberry, scratch grass, the mountains beyond. Endless sky on 6 sides of us. Wind. I lift up, tilt along the foothills. I'm old, and I love being old. I'm stiff and sore just from sitting in a chair. Imagine. The straight backs of my friends are learning to bow. I see stars where the woods were. Angers and their scars line my gut, and there are days when they still fester. I wake up clear, mulling the forms that surge toward me, that slip like angleworms onto my hook. I do not know much. I never know for sure. I look for what's there, out there, away over the water.
Thank you, Marijane. Those last 3 lines, or how many lines there were, that certainly exemplifies your writing. What I noticed was the value of all that is human within your poetry. And there's a quietness and an acceptance in that. I mean, as you're reading, even though you're reading about your life and people in your life, and I feel it could be me the way, poetry touches us all and makes us realize how we are all alike inside, even though we all have different journeys. And also your sense of the cycles of nature. And, even in that poem about the bishop pine, where you talk about the making of the clay book to the end of the book, the sense of longevity, and the way things change in people's lives too. And as I said earlier, just your acceptance of all that, and your sense of love and your sense of changing shapes. And it just really is so, to me, very calming. Your poetry is very calming and very human acceptance of all that is human. And it makes us realize also how just the simple clarity of excellent writing can give us so much revelation, at the same time lift us up and give us value to our own lives. And I think that's what poetry, at least one thing poetry does. So thank you. Both of your women's writing has been a blessing. Let me ask you the same questions I asked Holaday. We have about 4 more minutes. Marijane, when did you write your first poem? And what is it about poetry that attracts you to poetry?
Let's see. My first poem was written in junior high, and it was as Holladay's was. It was in rhymed quatrains with, meter, and I can't tell you the subject matter. It was you know how junior high is. It was somewhat. It was meant to be a joke. I entertained all my friends with it, and but it was also really fun to do. And we weren't taught much poetry, certainly not anything by living poets in those days. I didn't know you could be a poet. And so it was really quite a long time before I started trying to write again. And I almost immediately got hooked on language, and I think, as you mentioned, Harry, I wrote to calm myself. There was something about putting things in order, giving them a meaning, even though it was your meaning, it was an artificial meaning in a way. It just it just made things okay. It was an unhappy time in my life when I started writing, and I also felt that there was a poem by what was his name? William. I never can remember names when I need to. The wonderful poet in Oregon. It was a poem called Baja Eklag, and it's about that winter can come, and it's about how when something that powerful can happen, there's nothing that you have to blame yourself for. And they were words I needed to hear, and I just felt it saved me, and I've never gotten tired I've never gotten bored, and it's endless. It's the fascination of language. It's endless, and it's strangely powerful. I've tried to write about that, about the idea that you can actually call things into being by naming them in a certain way or writing about it well enough. And I don't know if I believe that's true, but it's a fun idea to play with. And it might be true.
Well, I also like your awareness of others, as I mentioned, even in that poem about, the couple making love next door and sense of happiness, and your also observation of Edward Hopper's, and the title Night Windows, and that spareness. I mean, I'm from Nebraska, and I don't know exactly where you grew up, but I feel within you that you could be a Midwest person, just something down to earth, and yet you're so good with language. And so this has really been a wonderful reading. I mean, I get to the point sometimes where things get difficult at this hour always really touches me and lifts me up. So thank you all, and thank you, Jennifer.
Harry, I cannot thank you enough. We need to tally how many of these you've put together for us, but you've got a growing audience of devoted fans. I know I am among them, and I look forward to Friday every week. Let me change this to this. And coming up next, we've got Friends of Bob with Bob Beecher. But again, Harry, just so many kudos. We adore you and can't wait to see you again next week.
Thank you, Paul.
Harry. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Jennifer.